When chaos filled the flight, Keanu Reeves chose respect over frustration. The plane was packed, every seat taken, and the air was already heavy with impatience. People were tired. Some had been waiting for hours at the gate before boarding. The flight attendants moved quickly, trying to calm passengers, but the tension in the cabin was strong. The sound of voices rose, blending into a restless noise. Then came the announcement. The captain's voice broke through the speakers. His tone was calm, but his words carried weight. He explained that there would be another delay because of a technical issue. It might take longer than expected. The cabin fell silent for a moment, but soon the silence turned into anger. Some passengers groaned loudly, others raised their voices at the attendants. Frustration spread like fire. In the middle of this storm sat Keanu Reeves, quietly in his seat. He wore a simple black jacket and kept his head slightly lowered, as if listening carefully. He did not complain. He did not move in frustration. Instead, he looked around, watching the discomfort on the faces of strangers. The old man 2 rows ahead tapped his cane nervously. A young mother tried to keep her baby from crying, and a group of college students argued about missed connections. Keanu leaned back, his eyes calm. He could feel the energy of the cabin shifting into chaos. A man in a business suit shouted at a flight attendant, demanding answers she did not have. Another woman clutched her phone, tears welling in her eyes, whispering that she might miss her father's surgery. This was the moment where frustration could easily turn to anger, but Keanu chose something different. He stood slowly, not drawing too much attention at first. His movements were simple, respectful, but enough that people around noticed. He walked toward the woman with the phone. She looked up, surprised. He bent slightly, his voice low but steady. "It will be okay. We'll all get through this." His words carried no magic solution, yet they carried peace. She blinked. Her tears paused, because in that moment someone had seen her pain. Others noticed too. The cabin was still restless, but Keanu's quiet presence began to change its rhythm. He walked back to his seat, but along the way he gently patted the shoulder of the old man with the cane. He gave a small nod to the college students, as if telling them without words to stay patient. People began to whisper. Some recognized him, some did not. It did not matter. What mattered was that in the middle of frustration, he showed respect to strangers. He did not raise his voice. He did not act superior. He acted human, and that carried more power than anger. The flight attendants, exhausted and under pressure, also noticed. One of them caught his eyes and gave a soft smile as if grateful for his silent support. But the chaos was not over. Minutes later, another announcement came. The delay might last even longer. Groans filled the air again, and one passenger shouted that he wanted to get off the plane immediately. The tension returned sharper, like a storm gathering more clouds. This was the real test. Keanu sat still for a moment, breathing deeply. Then, instead of sinking into the noise, he leaned forward and began speaking softly to the man seated beside him. His words were about patience, about how sometimes life forced us to slow down. The man listened, and his clenched jaw began to ease. Others leaned closer, curious. It was as if the cabin was waiting to see how this quiet figure would respond to chaos. Keanu knew he could not fix the problem. He was not the pilot. He was not the airline staff. But he could shape how people faced the problem. He chose humility over anger, kindness over complaint. And in that choice, he created a ripple. The ripple would grow. As the flight remained grounded, more challenges would rise, more emotions would test the strength of every passenger. What no one knew yet was that this night would not just be about a delay. It would become a memory of human struggle, of choices between frustration and respect, between selfishness and kindness. And Keanu Reeves, sitting in that cabin filled with chaos, was about to lead not with power, not with fame, but with something far more rare: patience wrapped in respect. When chaos filled the flight, Keanu Reeves chose respect over frustration, the air inside. The plane grew heavier with every passing minute. Time moved slowly, and frustration returned again, stronger than before. The passengers had already been waiting for hours. Hunger, tiredness, and fear began to mix together like a storm inside their hearts. A young boy no older than 10 sat in the middle row with his mother. At first, he had been cheerful, playing with his toy car. But now, his smile faded. His small voice asked again and again, "Mama, when will we fly?" His mother stroked his hair, trying to hide her worry, but her eyes showed deep exhaustion. Near the back of the plane, two men began arguing. One blamed the airline, the other shouted about missing a wedding. Their voices rose until others turned their heads annoyed. The cabin crew rushed over, trying to calm them, but the words of anger kept spilling out like fire that could not be contained. Keanu watched quietly. He understood something important. Anger spreads fast, but kindness can spread too if someone dares to start it. He unbuckled his seatbelt, stood slowly, and walked toward the two men. Some passengers gasped, recognizing his face, but he ignored the attention. He placed a gentle hand between the arguing men and spoke softly. "You both have reasons to be upset, but shouting will not make the plane fly faster. What if we help each other pass this time instead of making it harder?" His voice was calm, but it carried strength. The men looked at him, breathing heavily, but the tension in their eyes slowly weakened. One of them shook his head and sighed, lowering his voice, while the other leaned back into his seat, embarrassed by his outburst. The people nearby whispered again. Something was changing in the cabin. But the real twist came next. The captain made another announcement. This time, the words hit everyone harder. The delay would last several more hours. The plane was grounded due to a storm forming ahead on the flight path. Safety could not be risked. The reaction was immediate. Passengers groaned, some even shouted. A few demanded to be let out, others cursed under their breath. The sound of chaos returned louder than before. And then suddenly, the lights in the cabin flickered. The storm outside was beginning to move closer. Rain pounded against the windows, thunder rolled in the distance. The plane shook slightly, not from flying, but from the force of the wind outside. Fear filled the air now, not just anger. A woman clutched her chest, whispering prayers. A man muttered that he hated storms, his hands trembling. Children began to cry, their small voices mixing with the thunder. This was the moment when panic could spread. Keanu stood once again, not with drama, not with loud words, but with gentle calmness. He moved toward the young boy with the toy car. He knelt down, picked up the toy from the floor, and rolled it across the tray table, smiling softly. "Your car is faster than any plane," he whispered. The boy giggled, forgetting the storm for a moment. That laughter was like a spark of light in the darkness. Some passengers smiled faintly, watching. Keanu then turned to the crew, asking quietly if there was water that could be shared. The attendants, grateful for his kindness, handed him bottles. Instead of keeping them, he passed them around to strangers, an old woman, the young mother, the two men who had argued. He gave, without hesitation. This simple act began to calm people. They saw him, a man with fame, choosing to be one of them, not above them. He respected their struggle, and that respect softened hearts. But deep inside, Keanu knew this was only the beginning. Storms pass, but human fear and impatience do not disappear so quickly. What truly mattered was not the storm outside, but how people faced the storm inside themselves. And in the hours to come, the cabin would face moments that no one had imagined. Moments that would reveal the strength and weakness of human hearts, and the quiet power of humility in a world filled with frustration. When chaos filled the flight, Keanu Reeves chose respect over frustration. The cabin lights dimmed as the storm outside rumbled louder. Rain struck the windows like tiny stones, and thunder rolled so close that some passengers covered their ears. The crew did their best to stay calm, but fear was spreading. A baby cried loudly in the back, its wails rising higher with every flash of lightning. The mother held the baby close, whispering soothing words, but her own tears slid down her cheeks. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, some complaining, others turning their heads in annoyance. Suddenly, a loud thud shook the cabin. One of the overhead bins popped open, and a small suitcase tumbled down, hitting the floor. People gasped, a woman screamed, and a man jumped to his feet. Panic was in the air now. Before fear could grow larger, Keanu moved quickly. He stepped toward the bin, closed it gently, and bent down to pick up the suitcase. He looked around, his face calm, and said softly, "No one is hurt. It is safe. We are all okay." His words were steady, and his tone carried weight. Passengers who had started to panic began to breathe again. But then, something unexpected happened. The man who had jumped up shouted in anger. He pointed at the crew, accusing them of being careless, shouting that they put lives at risk. His voice was sharp, shaking with fear and rage. Others began to join in, their voices rising together. It was chaos once again. Keanu turned toward the man, his expression gentle. He did not shout back. He did not argue. Instead, he placed the suitcase back in the overhead bin and said, "Fear makes us say things we don't mean, but blaming will not bring us peace. Let us remember, we are all trapped here together. The only way through is if we respect one another." His words were not forceful, but they carried power. The man's voice broke. He sat back down, covering his face with his hands. The cabin fell into silence again, though the storm still raged. Outside, minutes stretched into hours. The air inside was warm and heavy, filled with unease. People were tired, hungry, and uncertain about when they would take off. To pass time, Keanu quietly began speaking to those around him. He listened to their worries about missed weddings, surgeries, family waiting in distant cities. He did not interrupt. He did not give false promises. He simply listened, his respect showing in every word and every nod. Slowly, something began to shift. Strangers who had been cold to one another started talking. The young mother with the baby received help from an older woman who offered her snacks. The two men who had argued earlier shared a blanket. The students who had been restless began telling stories to distract the children nearby. And at the center of it all was Keanu, calm, humble, respectful. He was not trying to lead, but his quiet actions were leading more than any loud voice could. Then, just as the cabin began to feel a little lighter, the captain's voice returned. This time, his words carried a warning. "Ladies and gentlemen, the storm ahead has grown stronger than expected. We will remain grounded for much longer. Please stay patient." A collective sigh filled the cabin, but before people could react, the plane shook again, harder this time. Trays rattled. Some passengers screamed, and a young girl fainted in the front row. Chaos returned, sharper than ever. And this was the moment when everyone looked toward Keanu, waiting to see how he would respond. When chaos filled the flight, Keanu Reeves chose respect over frustration. The young girl in the front row had collapsed suddenly, her head leaning against the armrest. Her mother screamed her name, shaking her gently, panic clear in her trembling hands. Passengers gasped, some rose from their seats while others shouted for help. Fear spread like a wave across the cabin. A flight attendant rushed forward, kneeling beside the girl, but her own hands shook as she fumbled with the emergency kit. People crowded closer, their voices mixing into confusion, some calling for water, others suggesting wild solutions. Keanu moved calmly through the aisle. His steps were steady, his face soft but focused. He crouched beside the girl and gently placed a hand on the mother's shoulder. "She will be okay," he whispered. His voice was not loud, but it carried enough strength to quiet the mother's cries for a moment. He looked around at the crowd and spoke firmly, yet gently. Please give her space. She needs air. His tone was respectful, not commanding, but the passengers stepped back. The flight attendant looked at him, her eyes filled with panic, and he nodded calmly, guiding her to open the kit. Together they checked the girl. She had fainted from fear and exhaustion, her breathing shallow but steady. Keanu asked softly, "Is there a doctor on board?" Silence followed for a moment. Then, a man from the middle row raised his hand hesitantly. He came forward, introducing himself as a nurse. Relief washed through the cabin. The nurse knelt, checked the girl's pulse, and nodded. She fainted. She needs rest, water, and calm around her. The girl's mother held her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. Keanu helped lift the girl gently back into her seat. He adjusted the pillow under her head, then leaned close to whisper words that only she could hear. Though unconscious, the softness of his voice felt like comfort that touched even her mother's heart. The cabin grew quiet again. Fear had been replaced with stillness, and everyone watched. They saw not a celebrity, not a famous actor, but a man who carried patience when others lost theirs. To ease the tension, Keanu turned to the passengers around and said, "We cannot control the storm outside, but we can control how we treat one another inside. If we stay calm, if we respect each other, we will come out stronger." His words struck deep. People who had been strangers minutes ago now shared looks of silent agreement. The young mother with the baby offered her blanket to cover the fainted girl. The old man with the cane began humming softly as if to distract the nearby children. Small acts of kindness grew from his example. The storm still raged outside, lightning flashing across the windows, thunder rolling above. But inside, for the first time in hours, there was peace. Not complete peace, but enough for people to breathe. The captain announced again that the delay would continue. Usually this news would bring anger, but now the cabin reacted differently. Tired sighs came, but no one shouted. People were beginning to learn patience. Keanu leaned back in his seat, his eyes thoughtful. He had not solved the delay. He had not ended the storm. But he had shifted something far more important, the way people carried themselves in the middle of it. Yet, deep inside, he knew the test was not finished. Storms bring more than thunder and rain. Storms reveal hidden truths, fears, and tempers, and soon another test would come, one that no one expected. When chaos filled the flight, Keanu Reeves chose respect over frustration. The storm outside began to settle into a rhythm, the rain still heavy but no longer violent. For a brief time, the cabin felt quieter. Passengers leaned back in their seats, some closing their eyes, some whispering softly. The fainted girl rested under a blanket, her mother holding her hand, thankful for the peace that had returned. But peace never lasts long when fear still hides beneath the surface. Suddenly, a loud beep echoed through the cabin. It was sharp, metallic, and strange. Passengers sat up straight, eyes wide, scanning the ceiling. The sound repeated, and then a flicker of light came from the back of the plane. A flight attendant hurried down the aisle, her face pale. She whispered to another crew member, and though they tried to stay calm, their nervous glances betrayed them. Whispers spread quickly. People feared something had gone wrong with the plane itself. A man in the back stood up and shouted, "Is it safe? Are we in danger?" His voice cracked with fear, and instantly the cabin filled again with restless noise. Keanu rose from his seat. He walked toward the flight attendants, not pushing, not demanding, but standing beside them. He asked quietly, "What happened?" The attendant explained that one of the smoke detectors in the back storage area had been triggered. It could be nothing. It might only be the storm affecting the sensors, but they had to check. When the word smoke spread through the passengers, panic broke out. A woman screamed, clutching her child. A man tried to push toward the exit, even though the plane was still grounded and the doors were closed. People shouted at the crew for answers, their fear turning quickly into anger again. Keanu stepped forward. His calm voice cut through the storm of noise. "Listen, everyone. The crew is doing their job. We need to stay together, not fall apart." His words were steady, filled with respect. He did not promise safety, but he promised unity. Still, the fear was strong. The sound of thunder outside added to the terror inside. The crew opened the storage compartment carefully, their hands shaking. Passengers leaned forward, holding their breath. For a moment, all that could be heard was the storm outside. Then came the announcement. It was a false alarm. No smoke, no fire, only a technical glitch caused by the weather. Relief flooded the cabin, but the damage of fear remained. Some passengers were still trembling, others wiping tears from their faces. Keanu knew that fear leaves a mark even after it passes. He walked back to his seat, but along the way, he stopped to speak with the man who had tried to rush the exit. Instead of scolding him, Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder and said softly, "You were scared, and that is human. But we cannot fight fear by running. We fight it by holding each other steady." The man lowered his head, ashamed but grateful for the respect in Keanu's words. One by one, passengers began to breathe easier again. But this time, something was different. They no longer looked only at the crew for strength. They looked at each other. They looked at Keanu. He had not shouted, he had not demanded control, yet somehow he had become the anchor in a sea of fear. As the storm outside slowly weakened, a strange thought passed through many hearts inside the cabin. Maybe this flight was not just about reaching a destination. Maybe it was about learning something deeper, something people had forgotten in the rush of their lives. But the night was not over, and one final, powerful test was waiting for them all. When chaos filled the flight, Keanu Reeves chose respect over frustration. The storm outside had begun to move slowly across the horizon. Lightning still flashed, but less often now. Inside the cabin, the passengers had found a fragile calm, though it was fragile like thin glass that could break at any moment. The captain's voice came again, steady but heavy. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are waiting for clearance. The weather ahead is unstable, and until it clears fully, we cannot take off. We ask for your patience." The words were simple, but they carried weight. The passengers had already been trapped for hours. Their bodies ached, their eyes were heavy, and their nerves thin. Patience was harder to hold than ever. That was when the next challenge arrived. The food supply on the plane was limited. The crew had passed out small snacks earlier, but now, with time stretching longer, hunger returned. Children cried softly, their parents trying to calm them. A few passengers asked the attendants for more, but the crew explained there was not enough for everyone. The announcement spread like fire. Not enough food. Tension filled the cabin again. Voices rose, complaints turned sharp. A man demanded extra for himself because of his age. A woman argued that her children should be fed first. Two passengers snapped at each other across the aisle, each insisting their need was greater. The unity that had begun to grow was breaking apart. Keanu watched silently for a moment, his eyes moving across the cabin. He understood something important. This was the true test, deeper than storms or alarms. Hunger, fear, and impatience revealed who people really were. He stood slowly, walked to the aisle, and spoke gently. "There is not enough for all, but we can choose how we share what we have. If we fight, some will go hungry. If we respect each other, no one will feel forgotten." He reached for the small snack pack given to him earlier. Instead of keeping it, he walked toward the young boy who had been restless since the beginning. He placed it in his hands with a smile. The boy's eyes lit up, and his mother whispered a tearful thank you. Others watched, and something began to stir. The old man with the cane offered his share to the fainted girl's mother. The students broke their pack into pieces, handing some to the children nearby. Little by little, strangers began giving instead of holding. The cabin, which had been seconds away from falling into selfish chaos, began to soften again. People discovered that sharing even the smallest piece of food brought comfort greater than eating it alone. Keanu did not preach, he did not command. He simply showed respect through action, and the ripple spread once more. Yet even as peace returned, a new thought grew in everyone's heart. What if the delay never ended? What if they would be trapped here all night? The hours stretched. Darkness outside grew deeper, and inside the cabin lights glowed faintly like tired stars. People leaned on each other, some sleeping, some whispering softly, and in the middle of it all sat Keanu, quiet, humble, and steady, his presence holding the fragile peace together. But he knew what no one else realized. The night still carried. One last lesson, one last trial before the flight could continue. When chaos filled the flight, Keanu Reeves chose respect over frustration. The cabin was quiet at last, but it was not the peace of comfort. It was the peace of exhaustion. People leaned back in their seats, their faces pale and heavy with tiredness. The storm outside was fading slowly, yet inside, uncertainty still weighed like a shadow. No one could escape. The fainted girl now slept peacefully, her mother holding her hand. The young boy with the toy car had stopped asking questions, resting against his mother's shoulder. The old man with the cane dozed lightly, the blanket covering his knees. But then, as the hours dragged on, the final test arrived. The captain's voice came again, softer than before. Ladies and gentlemen, there has been another complication. Due to weather delays and traffic control, this flight may be canceled tonight. We may have to wait until morning. The cabin erupted. Passengers cried out, some in disbelief, others in anger. After so many hours of waiting, after hunger, fear, and storms, the thought of starting over was too much. Some shouted at the crew, others began demanding to be let off. Voices rose higher and higher until the cabin shook not from thunder, but from human frustration. For a moment it seemed respect would shatter completely. And then Keanu stood up, slowly, without rushing. The noise did not stop at once, but little by little people turned their eyes toward him. He walked to the center of the aisle, his face calm, his voice steady. I know you are tired. I know you are angry. I feel it too. But look around us. This storm, this delay, this night, it has shown us something important. We are strangers, yet tonight we have held each other. We have shared, we have cared, we have faced fear together. That is not a loss. That is a lesson. His words struck deep. The cabin grew quieter. People who had been shouting moments before lowered their voices, their eyes softening as they remembered the moments they had just lived. The blanket shared, the food passed, the comfort given to the fainted girl. Keanu continued, his voice low but powerful. We cannot change the storm, we cannot force the plane to fly, but we can choose how we walk through this night. If we choose anger, we will remember nothing but pain. If we choose respect, then even in delay, we will not have lost our time. We will have gained each other. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was not empty. It was full, filled with reflection. People looked at one another not as strangers, but as fellow travelers in the same trial. The old man with the cane spoke softly. He is right. The young mother nodded, pressing her baby to her chest. Even those who had shouted most fiercely now looked down, ashamed but also relieved. For the rest of the night, the cabin was not perfect, but it was different. People shared stories, laughter rose in soft waves, and kindness replaced complaint. The hours passed with a gentleness that no one had expected. By morning, the storm had cleared. The captain announced the flight was ready to take off. Instead of cheering loudly, the passengers smiled quietly at one another. They had been through something together, something greater than a journey through the skies. When the plane finally lifted, carrying them into the light of dawn, every heart on board carried a memory that would never fade. And at the center of that memory was not thunder, not delay, not fear, but a man who had chosen respect over frustration, kindness over anger, and humility over pride. Keanu Reeves sat in his seat, gazing out of the window at the rising sun. He did not speak. He did not draw attention to himself. But the passengers around him felt the truth. Sometimes the greatest strength is shown not in power, but in patience.